Welcome to this episode of Leaning into Discomfort. My name is Peter Kim, and I am the head women's soccer coach and assistant track and field coach here in Middlebury. My preferred pronouns are he, him. We will start by having our panel introduce themselves.
My name is Emic Bentley. I'm a junior from Cleveland, Ohio, on the men's ice hockey team, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
Hey everyone, I'm Izzy Hartnett. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the Middlebury women's soccer team, and I am a senior Feb from outside of Boston.
Hello everyone, I'm Martin Beatty. I'm the head men's and women's track and field coach, class of '84 of Middlebury, and I use he, his, and him pronouns.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Curvin, the Dean of Admissions. I've been at Middlebury for 7 years, and I use she, her, and hers pronouns. Glad to be here.
You know, you all in your own comments have touched on sort of the pathways that people have taken to Middlebury. And the question came up, you know, how do people find Middlebury? And I'm wondering, maybe Emac and Izzy, could you just take a moment to sort of trace your pathway back and tell us how you found out about Middlebury and how you ended up here?
I could start talking about my path. So I graduated high school in 2016, Solon High School, Cleveland, Ohio, like I said. And to the path to college hockey is a little different than any other sport. To play college hockey directly out of high school, you have to be, the latest and greatest, as they say. So a lot of those kids that go directly from high school right to college are like your stars that you see in like the NHL later in today's date. So a lot of students like myself take some time off in between and play what's called juniors. So I actually spent 1 year in New Hampshire, moved up to New Hampshire, and then a second year in Texas, and lived in those places for 2 years, took classes 1 year, had a job the other year, and really kind of just dove right into the city and the culture and was able to live in a new place and see what different parts of the world were about, which really helped my journey immensely and my maturity level and all that good stuff in the end immensely. But I think when you talk about diversity in hockey and recruiting, personally myself, I can tell you I'm the only Black player that's ever been on any of my teams. I've never had another Black hockey player on my team. So that brings the question to me, is it a recruiting problem or is it an institutional problem? Who can afford to play hockey? Some junior leagues, everything's paid for. So your billets, the people you live with, it's paid for, equipment, all that's jazz, it's all free. But there's a lot of places where you have to pay out of pocket, to live, to play hockey, equipment, all that stuff. It adds up tremendously in the end. So I think it's less of a question of recruiting, or maybe it's less of a question of recruiting and more of a question of who has access to these particular sports and how do we make them more accessible in the end.
Yeah, so I first learned about Middlebury through soccer. I also, both my parents went to NESTAC schools, so they had that little bit of influence over me. And I came to Middlebury for the first time for a soccer camp in the summer. And that's when I first fell in love with it, going into my junior year of high school. And I feel super lucky that I was exposed to the college, learned about the academics and the people through those camps, because you're able to talk to actual students, in my case, the women's soccer players, who have always been an incredible bunch. We're really close with our alumni. And I was fortunate enough to live just 3.5-hour drive. It was a lot trickier in the winter going over the pass, but fortunate enough to be close where I was able to come up for clinics and camps. And I was fortunate enough to have my parents take the time out of their busy schedules to take me with them. And for these camps and clinics, the clinics usually were 8:30 to 3:30 or 4. On weekends, and then that was about 2-3 times a year. And then the summer camp was 3 days, 2 nights up here in Middlebury. And so in all those cases, you need to come up and most likely stay in a hotel unless you want to drive up at like 4:30 in the morning. So that always added a layer to it, the financial side of that, and the time commitment. And that's something that I became very aware of in the process, and felt lucky that I was able to go to everything, but it definitely was a privilege, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like being further away, or not being able to have those same resources coming to the camps, because playing in front of Pete, and having that time where he can coach you and see how you can adapt to his systems and his coaching style is something that's really important to joining the team. And so I was extremely lucky to have those experiences and be able to go to those camps and clinics. And in the end, it turned out that I wasn't recruited, even though we went through all those steps, and me and Pete joke about it still. And I still knew that from those camps and clinics and the exposure to Middlebury that I still wanted to be here, even if I wasn't a student athlete and I wasn't playing soccer. And when I got in early decision, Pete was like, of course you can come try out in the fall of my first year. And it was also a great way kind of to redecide if playing college soccer was something I really wanted to do, because it was kind of on my own terms. And yeah, that's kind of how I got to Middlebury.
I think those are such familiar stories. And one of the things I've really noticed about athletic recruiting is how the dots get connected, and thinking about ways in which we can add lines or add connections to be able to connect through camps, or to connect through coaches who are in high school, or figure out ways that we can support coaches making those connections with additional students in the process, so that the onus isn't just simply on, can you get to campus and can you participate in these activities here, but other places as well. And I think that's something that we've tried to do in our general recruitment efforts, is to just make connections and find people who have networks of students that we're interested in talking to, and simply just talking to them about college, not necessarily even about Middlebury, but just here's what our process is, here's what kinds of things we look for in the admissions process, and here's the type of institution we are. So as you're thinking about different schools of different sizes and different locations, that you have a sense of what Middlebury is. But it is really interesting to hear, sport by sport, there are these sort of dots that get connected in various ways, and they start pretty early on. You know, there's a huge network before you even get to high school, where you're sort of working towards you know, investing in that sport and spending time either on club teams or spending time on school teams, and really investing for the long game, right? The opportunity to kind of consider being a college athlete at the end of that road. So I think for us, it's really figuring out, how do we jump into those different points and find ways to identify students who maybe weren't necessarily on that path from elementary school on, and sort of know a little bit about how that process works, that camps are really central for many sports. And, you know, how do we just find points of entry into the conversation to think about diversifying the team, but also broadening the team geographically, and thinking about the ways in which students even consider a place like Middlebury when it may not be in the sphere of information that they have in front of them, because they're really Midwestern, or they're really, you know, thinking about West Coast experiences and not really factoring in what Middlebury is.
And Nicole touched upon a good point. Both EMAC and Izzy, your two sports, it's the path that you guys took to, get seen by coaches is one of, you need some means. You need to get to camps in the summer and stay in hotels, and it definitely takes some money to do that. And as we're talking about diversity and trying to attract more students of color and all types of diversity to Middlebury College, some of those, or many students, can't really do it that way, the way that you did it. And and this is probably a whole nother discussion, and Pete could probably speak to this a little bit more, but and Nicole did touch on this, hopefully there are other pathways that we can locate those students who can't do it through traveling to this camp and that camp every week and staying in this hotel and that hotel, but yet they, they're good enough to be on one of our teams, and they're bright enough students to be accepted to Middlebury. Luckily, in my sport in track and field, it's no pun intended, black and white. I mean, either you're fast enough or you're not. You can run that time, or you can jump that far, or throw that far, and it's a lot easier that way. But in your sports, it's a hurdle for some people to not be able to afford to travel to this school and that school and this state and that state every weekend to pay money for those camps.
I think one other thing that comes to mind is really thinking about the ways in which Middlebury can influence the sort of whole system of how someone gets recruited for a particular type of sport. And so from the really basic things that we can do, like thinking about the ways in which we're communicating with recruits and how we do that, and also thinking about the timing of the process and thinking about what ways we could expand the pool if we looked at different calendar dates, or we thought about, how the overall system works or doesn't work for allowing students to find us at the point at which they're ready to find us in this process. And so I think, there's definitely larger systemic things that are harder to break down. But from my view, I think as Middlebury, we can work together to think about those smaller things that might influence and make change. I'm also really heartened to know that, individual teams at Middlebury are having conversations about inclusivity. And that's regardless of the makeup of the team and backgrounds that they have on the team, because I also think that's important work that needs to happen simultaneously to going out and talking to students about what Middlebury is. We have to do the internal work as much as we're doing the external work to be able to embrace and include people in conversation about what the team's culture is, and what conversations are you having, particularly right now as we're thinking about what's happening in the national sort of news and around the election and around racial unrest. But more importantly, just how are you building a team culture that is ready for inclusivity, is ready for more diversity. And I think that's important and really reassuring, and makes me incredibly hopeful as I hear, the work that Martin mentioned about, all of the coaches coming together to have that conversation. And then knowing that I've sat in many conversations, especially in the last couple of months, about doing the work. I think that's as important as all of this piece of conversation that we're having about how do you find more students and how do you think about places to go to have that conversation.
As I think of recruiting and I listen to this conversation, a word that continually pops into my head is visibility. So Martin mentioned, as you have your times, you're good to go. That's really all you need. But when I think of my own story, my own recruiting process, the first time that I actually heard of Middlebury was in New Hampshire. So while I was in New Hampshire, I was hanging out with one of my teammates, and I got an email from Coach Sinclair, who was the head coach here. And he said, EMAC, I saw you play here in New Hampshire. We loved your game, blah, blah, blah. Love to talk to you further about Middlebury if you have the opportunity. And I said, okay, great. I turned to my friend, Mitch, and I said, Mitch, what is Middlebury? Have you heard of this school before? I really have no idea what's going on. And he said, AMAC, that's actually a pretty fantastic school that you'd probably be very interested in. So you should return that email. And I said, okay, and I did. And the rest is history. But as I think about visibility, the more I think about it is, in New Hampshire, they had the ability to see me play in person live. But when I moved to Dallas, I played in Texas. Suddenly, they did not have that opportunity to see me live anymore and in person. So then I got thinking, how were they then able to see me, or how would they be able to see other people that are not in like that relative New England area, as Izzy mentioned before? So when I think of recruiting and the whole process, I think of visibility and how are we going to be able to see students or student athletes that are in non-traditional markets, as mentioned before.
So you've all touched on a small number of really important obstacles to students landing at Middlebury, and it could be because they didn't know about it, or it could be because coaches or admissions didn't know about them, and the obstacles that you pointed to have been largely either economic or sort of getting the word out, marketing, if you will, to the wider audience, and then of course the inclusive cultures on our team, and making sure that we're a welcoming environment for people who've never been here before. And I'm wondering, as I'm gonna hope you can stay with me as I sort of launch on sort of a circle here, because I want to start by just hearing your thoughts on any other obstacles or barriers that students might encounter, or that admissions and athletics might encounter in attracting students here. And then following that, I'd love to just kind of leave the tape running and ask Martin and Nicole, what where have you found success? And for Emac and Izzy, as people who've been through the process, but also are a fresh set of eyes, where do you see the gaps that we can fill as an institution to help us be more diverse?
So I'm going to start by saying, obviously Middlebury has a pretty large price tag. So, financial aid is very important. We just launched on a terrific campaign last month to raise money for our financial aid part of the endowment. And I thought that was terrific. We got the athletic teams involved. All the coaches emailed their alumni and said, hey, give to our financial aid fund. This will help Middlebury students of the future, including athletes. And we had a lot of participation. And I thought that was wonderful for the college to, have that foresight and really know that this is important. We want students who not only can afford Middlebury, but students who can't afford Middlebury. And that's a priority. So, that's definitely, one of our challenges. These schools are not inexpensive. And so we need to help people out, but we're trying to do that. And we're trying to really broaden that financial aid budget. I think that's terrific. I think, the other challenge I see at Middlebury is just location, and it's a pro and it's a con. We're in beautiful Vermont, but we're very far away from cultural centers. And I love it because of that, but also it's tough to get people here. Peter, I'm just jumping ahead. You mentioned successes. And for me, I feel like I have, and probably a lot of us, I'm sure Nicole feels this way too, and you, Peter, as a coach, if I can get someone here at this campus to just see it, I'm halfway there. I'm halfway to winning them over to come to Middlebury College, because it's just a beautiful place and we have a beautiful campus, and just seeing the Green Mountains and the Adirondacks to the west is terrific. And that's what made me fall in love with the school when I first looked at it. So what is an attribute to Middlebury is also a challenge. And but if we can get them here, we're halfway home.
Yeah, I think, certainly what Martin touched on in terms of affordability, I think that's a huge piece. The other thing that comes to mind for me is we've talked a lot about what resources it takes to even be visible to coaches. And sometimes we don't really have a good sense of what resources students need. In some case, they might be able to get themselves to camps, but they might not be able to afford all that goes into the build up to camps. And so I think thinking about resources and really kind of asking more questions about what does it take to attract a student to our, sort of recruitment process, but also what other resources are students looking for in terms of the support that they get in addition to financial aid. What other considerations? If you're recruiting a student from Texas, there's transportation. If they come to Middlebury, it's getting back and forth to home, it's staying connected with family, it's potentially being on campus for breaks instead of going home multiple times in the year. And so I think, kind of expanding that conversation around what we mean by supporting and aiding students going forward. For me, bright spots have always been about building relationships and working with organizations that are now good allies for the college and really look out for, terrific students who they think would be a really good fit for us. instead of us continually having to be the person that goes out and talks to individual students. And so for us, it's thinking about pipelines, it's thinking about organizations in Los Angeles, it's thinking about organizations in Chicago, in the Midwest, places where we can have contact with an advisor or someone who has an influence over prospective students who can say, you know, Middlebury is a highly selective institution and you are ready for that. You can make it through their admissions process and this would be a tremendous fit for you. So bright spots are always about the human connection and the trusted adults and advisors who really influence students, much like coaches influence students around their choices when they're thinking about going to college. But certainly bright spots are all about building that connection.
I can jump in too to add that my mind also went back to our conversation about the difference between inclusivity and diversity. And something that's really important, I think, for making Middlebury a more inclusive place, and specifically mid-athletics, is really looking internally on our team culture. And something I didn't realize until I came to Middlebury was kind of the social influence and the social capital that athletic teams do have at Middlebury, because we are a small school and I think it's approximately 30% of the student body is on varsity teams. And it's about what we can do internally and having certain conversations and holding each other accountable and really pushing each other to question our traditions or question the way we communicate or the way that we talk about other teams. And I would say this also sparked my sophomore year because of something that I attended that was put on by Middlebury College. And I think the influence of the director of equity and inclusion and her incredible work that she does at the college really influenced our team culture. And me and a teammate or two went to one of her workshops, and that really launched us into a deep dive into looking into our team culture. It first started out with complicity around sexual violence and sexual assault, and then began to talk more about how can we be more inclusive when it comes to a variety of identities, race, sexual orientation, and gender identities. And I think that a lot of this comes down to how can we continue to change our team cultures and be a more inclusive place where people want to be, especially when we have this larger influence. And Mac, I don't know if you feel the same way with the men's hockey team, but I'd love to hear what you think about that as well.
Absolutely. I think one thing I really wasn't expecting when I first stepped on campus was kind of, like you said, to be pigeonholed into that athlete specific role. And I think that's something that I myself have tried to do a good job of distancing myself, not distancing myself, but creating friends and relationships outside of just hockey and sports. Because Middlebury has so much more to offer than just athletics or academics. There really is just something for everyone. That's what I like to say. But as I think of the bright spots of not only Middlebury, but my recruiting process as a whole, I have to think of the people that go to Middlebury. It really was the deciding factor for me, and it hopefully it's the deciding factor for a lot of other students. But to add to my story even more, I never visited Middlebury before I actually committed to the college. So as I said, I was talking to my friend. He gave me a contact of an old teammate that actually was on the team this previous year, just graduated as a senior. And I called him randomly on a Tuesday, and with the conversation just sparked up. We talked about school, everything from school to hockey, life in general, life on campus. And I'm proud to say that I'm still to this day now he's one of my best friends here. He's graduated, like I said, he's one of my best friends on campus. And I think that the more people just talk about Middlebury and the more people just can get to know what all it has to offer beyond sports, beyond academics, beyond just the beauty and the nature of Vermont, that you can truly find something for everyone.
Thanks for that, guys. So I wanted to maybe dive into to your experience, EMAC, and a couple of different areas that you've mentioned, and hear your thoughts, because as you pointed out, you played a sport that's primarily white. And then, as Nicole pointed out, Middlebury, while it's growing in diversity and finding a lot of success, is still a primarily white college. And I'm wondering, you know, people often say, you know, when they are choosing what sport to play, what club to join, what college to attend, that they look for people who look like them. And I'm wondering, you know, from those two experiences, how would you counsel people who look into the hockey scene, the youth hockey scene, who might have those concerns? And likewise, how would you encourage someone, you know, a Black student, a Latinx student, to look at Middlebury, and why?
Absolutely, that's a great question. To be completely honest with you, I'd say that hockey is for everyone. That's the slogan of the NHL, the National Hockey League's been using in the past few years. Hockey is for everyone. I think that as soon as you find, it's less about knowing people that look like you, and I think it's more about finding people that you can truly commonly connect with. My favorite teammates and some of my best friends to this day they've never been the best players, never been the best skaters, moved on, played in the best places, but they've always just been really good people. And I think that's the true meaning of not only hockey but of sports, to just find people and connections that you can really attest to and latch on to and make connections for the rest of your life. So I'd say it's less for me, at least personally, it was less about seeing people that look like me, and it was more about finding a place where I knew that I could meet people that I would be able to be friends with for the rest of my life. So, and I think I've done more than a great job of finding that. Some of the players on my team, I know will be the best man in my wedding. So I definitely think that Middlebury is a great place to find that, if that's what you're looking for.
You know, along those lines, and to kind of you know, bring the rest of the panel into this conversation, how important do you think it is to have coaches and faculty who represent different races and cultures and walks of life, you know, both for working conditions and also for students who are looking at the school?
Yeah, I think when you're building any team, there's huge value in bringing different life experiences, different perspectives, different avenues to the same point. You know, bringing students from lots of different places to the college. I think there's value certainly in the classroom, and, you know, in support of student organizations and in faith-based activities and all kinds of aspects of the Middlebury experience, where students can feel a point of reflection to either identity or experience. And I think, you know, diversifying and bringing inclusivity into the classroom and into activities and experiences that students have on campus is really important, and something of value that I think builds a richer experience for everyone, including faculty, including the staff. I think that's as important. And as you're thinking about, you know, the rest of the world, you know, when you talk about how people build organizations or build companies, inclusivity and diversity is a huge part of success. It's a huge part of working towards your end goal of graduation from Middlebury in a way that builds a team of people who are reflective of what's happening around us. And I think, you know, certainly we draw on that at Middlebury College, and certainly we aspire to have more faculty and more staff of color. But I think it's incredibly important to just the overall idea of success and what success looks like in terms of the experience and in terms of culture, and in terms of opportunity to dialogue and to make connections as much as possible. And I think, you know, it's an incredibly welcoming place. And I think that that's an aspiration, right, to move us forward, is to think about the ways in which you're going to sit in a classroom, or you're going to have a faculty advisor who has had a similar experience, or someone who maybe looks like you, or someone who came from your hometown, or your part of the world. And there is value, and there is connection, and there is synergy in having experiences that build on that diversity.
But yeah, I do agree with Nicole. And I've always felt that, we have such a valuable education here at Middlebury College. The faculty are terrific. They're all PhDs from top places. They care about their students. But boy, I feel like such a big part of education is also being around different people from different places, from different religions, and different ethnicities. And I feel like that was a big part of my Middlebury experience. And just getting to know so many different people, besides people who are on my athletic teams. And that was fun for me. And I when I look 35 years later, half my best friends from Middlebury are people who I played sports with. The other half are people who I didn't play sports with, and they were non-athletic, and they were just as valuable as friends to me as the ones who are on athletic teams. And I just think that we talk about diversity here. There's all kinds of diversity, that you can get out of the college experience. But that part of being a student at college is very important. Just getting to know many different people and stepping. And I think EMAC alluded to this earlier. Just kind of stepping outside of that safety of the team bubble and meeting a lot of other different people just helps you grow more as a person. So that's a really important point.
Yes, when I think about the wealth of knowledge that I've learned here at Middlebury, as much as I've learned in the classroom and will continue to learn in the classroom, I must say that a bulk of my learning has been done outside, and through maturity, through meeting people with different experiences, different places. So I think that kind of answers the question right there of what do we need more faculty and staff of color, and I think the answer is yes, but not for the reasons you may think. It's as much as you can learn from someone that looks just like you, can learn just as much from someone that looks that doesn't look like you. So I think that the more faculty and staff we have that are people of color that we can learn from, that come from different places, will help every student much more beneficially in the end. So.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate your time. And speaking of time, it has flown by, and we have reached the end of our program. So I want to thank each and every one of our panelists and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Committee for making this happen. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Leaning into Discomfort.